Indeed, influential global media outlets are reporting today that representatives of the Iranian regime are already holding consultations regarding the possible evacuation of Ali Khamenei to Russia, as well as the top leadership of the Iranian regime. Now, of course, to some, this situation might seem absolutely fantastic, but let's take a closer look. The Iranian regime was formed, consolidated, and reinforced starting from the time of the Iranian Revolution in 1979. And some might say that, well, after almost 45 years, everything there is so entrenched that nothing remains to be changed. And even the former crown prince, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, who tried to assume the mantle of opposition leader, ultimately couldn't manage it. And it would seem that everything should have been going as well as possible for the Iranian regime. Even the war launched against it by the IDF was supposed to strengthen the regime. It would seem that everyone should have rallied around it, but nothing of the sort is happening. And already the first signs of anger are beginning to emerge on Iranian soil. Meanwhile, the American leader Donald Trump, who had just celebrated his 79th birthday, was among the first to speak with the Russian dictator Vladimir Putin. According to official information from the Kremlin, this phone conversation lasted more than 50 minutes. Again, if you're celebrating your 79th birthday, well, let's put it this way. God willing, of course, we wish Trump many long and happy years, but in any case, at that age, every year is celebrated in a special way, so to speak. Especially considering that in the past year alone, there have already been at least 2 assassination attempts on the American leader. And so naturally, when you're celebrating in a special way, you have a military parade waiting for you. You have dozens of world leaders who want to congratulate you. You devote almost an hour out of your 24 hours, nearly an hour of your precious nato talking with one of them. At the same time, this particular person is clearly not a friend of America, clearly not a friend. Well, fine, let it be. According to ABC News, during this nearly hour-long conversation, Trump stated that he is open to the possible participation of Putin as a mediator in resolving the conflict between Israel and Iran. Putin himself mentioned this during the phone conversation. Russian media immediately spread this news through all the world's news agencies. As Trump stated, he is ready. He called me about this and we had a long conversation. At this stage, Trump reminded the US is in no way involved in what is happening, but he did not rule out US participation in the event of further escalation. He has already received a response from Iran. The Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Islamic Republic of Iran, Araghchi, replied that they do not believe that America could have stayed out of this. He also naturally accused official Jerusalem of trying to disrupt the nuclear deal negotiations and stated that America is complicit in these attacks and must acknowledge its responsibility. This very phone conversation on Donald Trump's birthday has already caused, let's put it this way, a wave, mildly speaking, of bewilderment in many places, as well as criticism related to the fact that Donald Trump is essentially inviting, even directly encouraging Putin to act as a mediator in yet another conflict, another war, while Putin himself has started the war against Ukraine and has no intention of ending it. And it seems that there were complaints and questions from the White House directed at him, but without ending the war he himself started. Putin is now rushing to act as a mediator between Iran and Israel. Why? It's pretty clear, actually. Judging by the momentum its military machine has gained, Israel does not intend to stop at any intermediate objectives in the near future. Already look on what is essentially the 3rd day of the operation. Rockets and bombs have been launched at the gas extraction fields. One of them, East Pars, on the border with Qatar, is the largest in the world. It holds 20% of the world's proven gas reserves. Naturally, all of this is starting to burn. This is not just an environmental disaster in the making. It's a huge problem for the entire region and, in fact, for the world as well. And, of course, oil prices have already sort of rocketed, as they say. They are already skyrocketing. And the same thing could happen to gas prices in the very near future. And this is only part of the consequences of this war. Naturally, Ukraine is watching the situation in the Middle East with concern. On the one hand, of course, we absolutely and fully support the ongoing efforts of the State of Israel to eliminate the terrorist stronghold in Tehran, and we hope that this military operation, Al-Kalami, will come to an end. If not with the fall, then at least with a serious weakening of the Tehran regime. This is already happening, and this goal will become unattainable. But for Ukraine, let's put it this way, this war is only beneficial if it is short term. If it drags on into the medium term, it will bring with it a number of very serious risks, the first of which is absolutely obvious, a diversion of attention, and as a result, a decrease in both military and financial support for Ukraine from our Western allies. It's not just about the United States. Sooner or later, the United Kingdom will also get drawn in, and possibly over time, other European allies will find themselves involved in this situation as well. Although right now they are doing everything they can to stay on the sidelines. However, if the flames ignite and the Tehran regime really does begin to collapse, a civil war will break out, similar to what we previously witnessed in Syria, though it likely won't be as prolonged as it was in Syria. It could be much more rapid, but no less bloody because of it. In this case, of course, the Europeans, despite their wishes, will have to intervene in the situation in some way, perhaps under a NATO mandate, perhaps under a UN mandate. Once again, I repeat, it is still too early to draw such conclusions. But the fact is, if this conflict does not end in the near future, it could drag on and escalate, and this will pose serious risks, I repeat, for the whole world and for Ukraine. The second, obvious to everyone, and not just to Ukraine, but to everyone, a negative factor and consequence of all this is the sharp rise in energy prices. The price of oil is already starting to break records, and as a result, gas prices will follow suit. Naturally, all goods will begin to get more expensive since everything is tied to energy prices. And another consequence, which Zelensky mentions, is that it is obvious Iran will have far fewer opportunities to support its Moscow partners. And this is also true because it is absolutely clear that Iran will now be forced to focus on accumulating its own reserves. They need them now. This is a matter of survival for the Tehran regime. Therefore, of course, no Shaheds, no ballistic missiles. Iran simply will not be able to supply any of these to Russia in the near future. And this period will last at least a year to a year and a half. That's the consequence. And of course, Donald Trump's position, who, without consulting other Western allies, which should have been done at the very least with NATO, has already, by his own decision, essentially invited Putin to take on the role of mediatoris, also a very dangerous development. I think there's no need to explain why Russia acting as a mediator between Israel and Iran is a threat to the entire free world. This strengthens Russia. It's clear that they will now try to save Ali Khamenei's regime, but at the same time, they will, of course, be strengthening themselves and trying to rid themselves of the problems they previously encountered in Syria. The fall of Bashar al-Assad's regime, who ultimately fled to Russia with all his looted wealth, his wife, and his family. Of course, Moscow will accept Ali Khamenei and the Tehran leadership, but for them, this will be a huge defeat, so they will try to negotiate. And of course, this is also not in our interest, since it would mean, among other things, Moscow's influence on the processes and on the opposition, including Israel. It is obvious that Moscow, acting as a negotiator, a mediator between Jerusalem and Tehran, is an absolutely unacceptable option for us. And Donald Trump, who made such a proposal, has already created very serious risks and problems for all of NATO, primarily through his decision. But so far, we see that he's not being criticized, and that is the right approach. On the one hand, it is the birthday of the US president, and obviously he should be congratulated, not upset. On the other hand, there are two equally important events ahead. The first is the G7 summit, the Group of Seven, which will take place very soon in Canada. And the second is, of course, the NATO summit at the end of the month on June 24th to 25th, which will be held in The Hague. I have already spoken about the symbolism of this event, and therefore the fact that the NATO summit is taking place in the same location as the Hague Tribunal is, of course, a coincidence. Of course, a coincidence, but also not a coincidence, since it is also a symbolic gesture naturally directed at the criminal Kremlin regime. Meanwhile, the war in the Middle East is escalating, and not only are Iran's military leaders and the intelligence chiefs being killed, which I will discuss further, but also nuclear scientists, as well as innocent people, civilians, are dying. According to sources in the Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, on June 14, as a result of a massive missile attack by Iran against Israel and a missile hitting a residential building in the city of Bat Yam, 5 Ukrainian citizens were killed. Among them were 3 children, minors, And at this point, their identities are still being established. And these are only, I repeat once again, only the first, unfortunately, results of what is starting to happen. This war, obviously, could follow two main scenarios. It will either be swifter, rapid defeat of Iran with the possible subsequent destabilization of the Tehran regime, or without either, the war could drag on for several months. But the chances that this war will end according to the first scenario are obviously higher. The Israel Defense Forces are crushing the Iranian regime too quickly. I would say that for many, this has come as a revelation. Although, by and large, there is really no surprise here. We remember the year 2022 when the so-called Second Army of the World tried to take Kyiv in 3 days, suffered a crushing defeat, and fled from Kyiv in disgrace after committing grave war, crimes, killing, raping, and destroying hundreds of innocent civilians in the Kyiv region, in Bucha, Irpin, Makariv, and other settlements. They flee in disgrace and everyone is shocked. How could it happen that the Ukrainian army, which in general no one considered a serious force, and importantly the territorial defense forces as well, made up of ordinary citizens, auto mechanics, drivers, flight engineers, anyone at all. So these people, many of whom picked up a weapon for the very first time, utterly defeated the professional Russian army, completely routed them, practically without giving them any chance to achieve their objectives. Except for the advances in the south and around Mariupol, the Russian army squandered all its other opportunities and operations. Let me remind you, at the start of the so-called special military operation, the capture of Kyiv was seriously considered, and it was possible, along with the landing near Odessa, the capture of Mykolaiv and so on. But as we can see, all these objectives were successfully failed by the Russian army. And now everyone is surprised what is happening with the Iranian army. It's exactly the same situation. There is an army that, it seemed to us, had been hardened, formed, had every opportunity for funding and armament, including from Russia, over the course of 45 years as it was being built up. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, a state within a state, all of this is now suffering a humiliating defeat. And as promised by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, soon you will see Israeli Air Force planes in the skies over Tehran. And I think this is no longer just a metaphor. This is absolute reality. This is what awaits us in the near future. And all of these, of course, accelerates the fall of the Tehran regime, which obviously is desired in Jerusalem, is wanted in Kyiv, but is greatly feared in the White House. At the very least, Donald Trump has already made this clear with his recent statements. Now, regarding preparations for escape, after all, the publication Iran International, citing informed sources, reported that the closest advisor to Ali Khamenei, who is also the deputy head of the office of Iran's Supreme Leader, has now begun secret negotiations with representatives of the Kremlin regarding the possibility of Ali Khamenei and the Tehran leadership potentially fleeing to Russia. The name of this remarkable person, in every sense, that is Ali Khamenei's right-hand man, is Ali Asghar Hejazi. It is this very Mr. Hejazi who is conducting negotiations regarding personal guarantees. And as Iran International reports, one of the high-ranking Russian officials gave Hejazi personal guarantees. In particular, it was stated that if the situation in Iran heats up, the Kremlin will arrange a safe golden parachute for him and his associates a chance to quickly evacuate to Russia. The Kremlin has also already made similar arrangements and guaranteed the possibility of free departure to Russia for a number of high-ranking Iranian officials, among whom possibly is Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei himself. Also, as Iran International reports, Moscow's special services have already, and this is important, worked out escape routes for Tehran officials. Earlier, Benjamin Netanyahu stated that, and I quote, "The top leadership of Iran is already packing their bags." Well, basically, that's exactly what's happened. Earlier, mass protests swept through Iran in 2022, 2023. We remember they took place, and we also recall that the former Crown Prince of Iran, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, tried to unite the entire Iranian opposition in exile, but this was not very successful. There are a number of organizations that do not join in, particularly leftist opposition groups and others. But for now, the opposition remains fragmented. However, this protest potential clearly exists in Iran. It is growing, and it was evident during the protests 2 years ago. And all of this could explode. There were huge lines of cars leaving Tehran, with rows of vehicles stretching out in several lanes. People are fleeing, civilians are escaping from Tehran, and they are fleeing because they do not believe the statements of official Tehran propaganda claiming that the Iranian army and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps will protect them from Israeli drones and missiles. They don't believe it. They are fleeing. That, in fact, is the real assessment of everything that is happening. And therefore, against this backdrop, the possible flight of the Iranian leadership would, of course, be a catastrophe for China, first and foremost. It would be a catastrophe for Moscow as well. They will now do everything they can to save the situation and, of course, in no way allow Israel to complete this operation. They will try, among other things, as we can see, Donald Trump has imposed an unofficial veto. Reuters reports this on Israel's plan to eliminate Iran's Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. At the same time, Reuters refers to statements from two anonymous senior White House officials. Allegedly, a representative of the US administration said, "Have the Iranians killed even a single American?" No. And until they do, we won't even discuss targeting the political leadership. At the same time, the head of Israel's National Security Council, Tzaki Hanegbi, stated that the Reuters report about a veto on killing Khamenei is a fake from the land of fakes. Well, generally speaking, they are denying this information. How things really are, we don't know for sure. But we can assume that certain signals, let's call them that, from Washington, suggesting that there should be no escalation or confrontation, but rather negotiations and bringing Putin to the negotiating table may have been sent. I don't think it was really a veto. I think there were some recommendations, suggestions, like we would prefer not to see such a scenario. That's possible. Similarly, according to the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, the Israeli attack resulted in damage to a nuclear facility in Isfahan, a uranium conversion plant, and a fuel plate production facility were affected. At the same time, no increase in radiation levels outside the facility was recorded. There was also a strike on the Fajarhan gas processing plant in the Bushehr area, which is in the southwestern part of Iran, where there is an industrial complex on the coast of the Persian Gulf. It is reported that a fire broke out on the territory of the plant. Also, the largest field in Iran and in the world, South Pars, located on the border with Qatar, suffered serious infrastructure damage at this facility. Well, we can see that Israel has already arrived, meaning they didn't wait, and Iran is not fulfilling the conditions for ending the war, even though Araghchi has essentially already requested not a capitulation, but a ceasefire, stating that they are ready to completely give up. He stated that they are ready to completely abandon the development of nuclear weapons, but they insist on being allowed to continue their nuclear research and nuclear energy projects, as they have stated. That is, this is what we want. In order to persuade the Iranian leadership to come to a decision more quickly, so to speak, not to drag things out and to make a decision sooner, the Israel Defense Forces are taking action. In particular, the IDF issued a warning to the residents of Iran in both Farsi and Arabic, urging them to evacuate from those areas of Iran where military facilities are located, especially those involved in weapons production, until further notice. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz also warned that Israeli forces will strike these facilities and will continue to skin the Iranian snake in Tehran and everywhere else, referring to nuclear facilities and weapons systems. The Israel Defense Forces also eliminated the head of Israeli intelligence, Mohammad Kazemi, as well as his deputy. The IDF launched a missile strike on the building of the intelligence organization of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps in Tehran. Iran International also reports under the rubble were the head of IRGC intelligence, Brigadier General Mohammad Kazemi, and his deputy. The building sustained serious damage. Also today, a strike was carried out at a record distance from Israel's border, 2,300 kilometers. A fuel tanker was hit on Iranian territory. Israeli pilots have shown that they are not joking around with Iran. Everything is more than serious. And we'll finish with another military report. Let's put it this way. Now, it's not about Israel or Iran, but about Tatarstan. Here, Ukrainian drones struck Tatarstan. This information was confirmed by the head of the republic, Rustam Minikhanov. It is reported that a fire broke out at a plant in the Yelabuga district, specifically in the Alabuga Special Economic Zone in Tatarstan. This is where the plant producing Iranian, specifically Shahed type, attack drones is located. Ukrainian drones struck here It is reported that one of the injured has died. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, stated that Ukrainian drones reached the target area and Russia deliberately attacked the office of the largest aerospace company, Boeing, in Kyiv. Yes, Boeing, the American corporation, has its own representative office. They cooperate with Ukrainian manufacturers, particularly with Antonov. According to the Financial Times, a strike was carried out deliberately on the office of Boeing, the largest American manufacturer of aviation and space technology. And the FT writes that this will provoke a fit of rage from US President Donald Trump, who had previously expressed on numerous occasions repeatedly growing frustration with the Kremlin's policies. This is primarily due to the fact that Moscow has now expanded its military targets and is now aiming at Western companies connected to the Ukrainian aerospace and defense sector. Naturally, all of these will have consequences. Let's see how the Americans will respond to this. That's the news for today, friends. As they say, we are keeping our fingers crossed for the plan to implement the escape of Ali Khamenei and other war criminals of the Tehran regime. May the road rise to meet them, as the saying goes. Let them have an Arab carpet to walk on their way out. That's it. Let them run along the path previously paved by the war criminal Bashar al-Assad.